Traditionally, our department has celebrated Asian American Pacific Islander AAPI Heritage Month with great excitement and joy, showcasing our rich and diverse cultures with dances and singing, and most memorably, with delectable food. Unfortunately, this year's theme, just like everything else in life these days, is nothing we're accustomed to. Today, in honor of the AAPI Heritage Month, we'd like to bring attention to additional threat that COVID-19 has created, a surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans, a deeply disturbing trend that has shaken Asian American community and threatens to undermine the progress our country has made towards inclusion. As we seek to find meaningful solutions, we think it will be helpful to start with a primer of recent and historical events. As a dear colleague of mine put it, only with knowledge, compassion, and action can we begin to hope for and create a better world. So with that, we'd like to present a video in an attempt to reflect the current state of this disturbing trend and some of the ingrained historical context behind it. We recognize that race is a sensitive topic in our beloved country, the most diverse country in the world. But progress begins with conversation in the hopes of understanding. And in the midst of so much chaos and hatred, our hope is that our communities can reach a place of understanding, respect, and love. We hope this video is a step in that direction. Truth be told, Asian Americans have not typically been the most vocal among other American ethnicities for a variety of reasons. But the cost of silence during this pandemic is simply too high. As we watch the virus infect our loved ones, for Asian Americans, the cost is even higher. In addition to the threat on our family's health, we're also seeing surging violence, both verbally and physically, against us.
As reports of coronavirus have spread across the U.S., so have incidents of anti-Asian violence. Amna Nawaz has more on that.
The coronavirus's origin in China has caused a backlash against Asian Americans in the first 2 months since the first positive diagnosis here. From schoolyards to trips to the grocery store, some Asian Americans have reported verbal and physical attacks, and the FBI has warned of a potential surge in hate crimes still to come. Beverly Leong told the NewsHour about her trip on the New York City subway.
He yelled at me on the train and said, "You people brought this virus here," before going to another part of the train car. And I found that really unsettling. My parents, me, my friends, we're all really on edge right now and kind of seeing how people react to us in public.
Stories like Beverly's led to the creation of Stop AAPI Hate, an online hate crime reporting tool that's registered more than 1,000 incidents in less than 2 weeks. Cynthia Choi is the co-executive director of Chinese for Affirmative Action. She helped to launch the reporting website, and she joins me now. Cynthia, welcome to the NewsHour, and thanks for being here. What specifically are people telling you? Included in some of the reports on your site, people will talk about being spat upon, about having things thrown at them. I always like to mention when we talk about race in America, we have to remember Asian Americans are the most diverse racial group, right? So you're talking about dozens and dozens of different kinds of identities and ethnicities all under this one umbrella group. And one of the most fascinating things about your report I found was that 61% of all reports were from non-Chinese people. Did that surprise you?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, the target has been Chinese, and the assumption that those who are being victimized are of Chinese descent. But our report shows that it's affecting and impacting all Asian Americans. And for the simple fact that there might not be a recognition of the distinctions, but the fact that it's the Asian face, it's the perception that we're foreigners, and that, again, we're all hosts of this infectious disease. And that's what's so troubling about it.
The NYPD today releasing crime stats for April. And no big surprise, overall crime is down. In fact, it's way down. But there is some most disturbing news in that number. And those numbers. There are many unsolved bias crimes here in New York City happening since the pandemic started. And most of them are against Asian Americans by thugs who boneheadedly believe Asians who live here brought the virus here. Here's Lucy Yang.
The narrow streets of Chinatown feel like a hauntingly empty movie set tonight, as if this once vibrant community has not suffered enough. Officials announced today hate crimes and bias incidents against Asian Americans are on the rise.
That's hurtful and painful for our communities.
Police counted 14 hate crimes last month, 15 Asian American victims, 11 arrests, all seemingly related to COVID-19. On April 26th in Queens, officials believe this man made hostile anti-Asian comments at a 36-year-old woman. When she tried to photograph him, she says he slapped her cell phone out of her hand. It shattered on the ground. He has not been caught. And another open case, police are still looking for this young woman who was suspected of smashing an Asian American woman on the head with an umbrella while on a city bus.
We are back with an unexpected side effect of this coronavirus crisis: Asian Americans becoming targets of discrimination. The FBI recently issued a warning about a potential spike in hate crimes. And just this week, ABC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen is here with more. And Vicki, this is a really, really troubling trend.
It is, and I will say it is personal for me too, Hoda.
Dr. Chen Fu is on the front lines in the battle against COVID-19. As a Chinese-American doctor, he feels both celebrated and vilified.
I feel an animosity that I've never felt before.
On his commute to the hospital, Dr. Fu says he was approached by a stranger.
You dirty Chinese, and he just kept saying that over and over again. I've never felt anything like this before.
This, just one of many incidents across the country now being reported. Asian Americans targeted for their race.
Get out of our country!
In Texas, this person yelling at a Vietnamese restaurant owner.
Get out!
And this man and his 2 children stabbed at a Sam's Club. The suspect, according to the FBI, thought the family was Chinese and infecting people with the coronavirus. In Minnesota, this note the tenants claim was posted on their door, reading, "We're watching you. Take the Chinese virus back to China."
We have seen everything from cashiers who will tell somebody, I'm not going to serve you because I don't want to catch coronavirus. We've also seen patients who have gone into health clinics who say, I don't want you as a nurse. I want somebody else to help me.
Because the nurse was Asian American?
Exactly.
I have never seen the Asian American community this scared. They're in fear for their life.
In my memory, hate crimes against Southeast Asian Americans ran rampant after 9/11. Besides that, have Asian Americans been used as scapegoats in other times of crisis?
I think it's unfortunate that a lot of Asian Americans don't know who Vincent Chin is.
What's the first thing that you think of when you hear of Vincent Chin?
Painful.
Tragic.
Oh, hate crimes.
Injustice.
Who?
I actually have never heard of Vincent Chin.
Forgotten?
It was the day before his wedding, and he was just trying to have a good time, maybe get a drink. He's this young Chinese American guy.
These 2 white guys, Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz,
noticed him, and Vincent was being a little rambunctious, obnoxious, because he was drunk. Come on, it's your bachelor party.
Witnesses overheard one of them say to Vincent Chin, "It's because you motherfuckers were out of work."
They had this idea that Japan was taking over the American economy.
He's referring to U.S. auto jobs being lost to Japanese manufacturers. Vincent Chin is Chinese American. The fight spills out into the street.
And they got a bat and hit him in the head 4 times.
He dies of a coma a couple days later.
His wedding date changed into a funeral date.
Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, they basically get off with a slap on the wrist.
Nothing happened to them. They didn't go to jail at all.
They would have been more harshly punished if they killed the dog.
Your pain around your economic insecurity and you wanting to project that onto this Asian man is justified.
I do remember that the Asian American community was galvanized after this occurred.
For the first time ever, you really see this activism swell up from across Asian American communities.
It reminds me of all the crimes that are happening now against the Muslim community and against the South Asian community. You have people who are being stabbed just for speaking Arabic.
I don't think any of the generation that's after me, or even my generation, knows about Vincent Chin because we're not educated.
Maybe it's just because we're known as the model minority and we just sweep a lot of things under the rug.
I should know about what people face, immigrants face when they came here to start a new life.
And we need to remember the past to make sure that it doesn't happen in the present.
That was my first time to hear about Vincent Chin. Have we made much progress since 1982?
I think the Vincent Chin murder was shocking to a lot of Asian Americans, not because it represented something new, but that it actually represented something old. It reminded Asian Americans that progress hadn't really been made.
In 1882, you could kill a, quote, Chinaman and get off paying $1. In 1982, you can kill an Asian American and get off paying $3,000. This was not justice, but there wasn't an organization that existed to stand up and say, this is wrong. What began out of that was meetings that started with 4 people, 10 people, 20 people, 100 people, and people were talking about what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? I raised my hand and I said, the world wants to know how the Asian American community feels about this.
In depth, Vincent Chin inspired protest marches, rallies, dinners, banquets.
The killing of Vincent Chin is probably the most tragic example of the kind of violence that's being committed against Asians.
Civil rights organizations of every kind came forward, as well as individuals.
We have been drawn together by death, an unplanned family reunion. Our hearts are made heavy by a mother who sits here with us, whose son was brutally killed just because he was. What can we do in the aftermath? Those who live, we must redefine America so everybody knows everybody fits in the rainbow somewhere.
That right there was a sneak peek of the upcoming PBS series, Asian Americans. And here now to talk about that moment in time that was featured and this moment in time are 3 incredible panelists I'm so excited to bring to you now. Helen Zia joins us. Of course, she's an activist, author, and former journalist. Her books include Asian American Dreams, The Emergence of an American People, and My Country Versus Me. Helen, thanks so much for being here. Also joining us is Darren Walker. He is president of the Ford Foundation that has a $13 billion endowment in search of social justice philanthropy around the world. He was also named one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world. Darren, thanks so much for being here. And also with us is Viet Thanh Nguyen, who really needs no introduction. We're all fans. But of course, he's the man behind the novel, The Sympathizer, which was a New York Times bestseller, and his debut novel, which just happened to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. He's a professor now at the University of Southern California. Viet, thanks for being here. So Helen, kick us off here now. Talk about that moment in time. We just saw the clip from the series featuring, and the parallels you are seeing to what's happening right now.
Well, very sadly to say, there are so many parallels between that moment 38 years ago and some of those clips that activism continued for a number of years, actually, to try to get justice for Vincent Chin and the Asian American community, and really to stand up for all people to have equal justice. That was 38 years ago. Vincent Chin would be 65 today had he not been killed. And that's chilling to think that we're talking about practically a generation ago, but it was a time that there was massive unemployment. There was a terrible depression in the Midwest that affected everybody. People had no work for years after having spent a lifetime working hard in very good paying jobs. And the suffering was across the country. There was a recession everywhere. The 80s were a terrible time. And there was an effort to find somebody to blame. And throughout the media, the halls of Congress, the corporate C-suites, people finally found an enemy they could all agree on, and that was Japan. And why? Because they built fuel-efficient cars that people preferred and could drive, whereas the dinosaurs from Detroit that got 7 or 8 miles a gallon, people couldn't afford to drive anymore. And by blaming Japanese people, Japan, and then everybody who looked Japanese, a young man named Vincent Chin was killed. And so we can see from that time, it's so similar to today. You know, we are just at the start of what every economist says is going to be a massive recession. They hesitate using the words depression, but we're talking about a global economic terrible time. And we have leaders, unfortunately, who are blaming people who look Chinese. And we're already seeing, as the Congresswoman Judy Chu already pointed out, so many different attacks. More than 1,600 have been counted, and we know that anything reported is an undercount. So we're seeing something very similar. And Vincent Chin was not the only victim of that terrible wave of racist innuendo, racist views at that time. Throughout the decade of the 1980s, there were many, many people of Asian descent who were killed. And I have to say that hatred has been stoked, not just then, but all the way through. The 90s were characterized by intense anti-China, looking for a Chinese spy. You know, this millennium began with the Islamophobia and the hatred toward brown Asian Americans and Muslims. And so here we are today. It's being stoked already, and you know, the fans are being flamed. And unfortunately, we are in a very similar situation. And I have to say, we are just at the beginning.
Just say that as a Black queer man in this country, I am appalled by what I just heard from Congresswoman Chu and what I have read and the reports I have seen of the rage directed at people of AAPI ancestry in this country. The same people who are expressing that rage towards your community are the same people who are expressing rage towards African Americans and all brown people, all immigrants. We have to understand that in America, justice, while Thomas Jefferson said that building a just nation was the work of America, justice is a contested idea and must be always fought for and protected, and we must be vigilant.
How can we protect our value as Americans? How can we leave behind a more inclusive and loving community for our children?
And what is the message to them right now?
I think the message is that anti-Asian racism has always been persistent in this country, as Helen pointed out. It's gone back to the 19th century with the presence of Chinese workers here who were brought here to benefit the American economy. And then when the American economy had no more use for them, they were demonized and posited against the white working class. So that dynamic is still persisting today. And the one guarantee that makes us all Asian Americans is anti-Asian racism. When anti-Asian racism is at its peak through violent incidents or through what we're witnessing today, we suddenly realize that we are Asian American. We realize we have something in common with each other. And if you have, in fact, grown up in this country during a period of relative racial comfort or stability for Asian Americans in the last decade or two, or if you are a newer immigrant and you don't have an awareness of the history that Darren brought up of our mutual struggles against racism throughout the history of this country, then it's easy to think that perhaps Asians are getting along and that we're assimilating into American society and that things are all good for us. So it's a shock to encounter anti-Asian racism. And I think one of the ways that we combat it is to talk about it, is to bring attention to the kinds of incidents that Judy Chu talked about, but also to bring attention to the historical lineage going back to Vincent Chin, but also much, much further back to the 19th century, and to tell stories about these kinds of incidents. One other thing I'd add to that in the end is that it's not enough for Asian Americans to be against anti-Asian racism. Of course, we're going to be against that because we're the victims of that. But it's going to ring hollow when Asian Americans demand justice for ourselves without demanding justice for others, as Darren was saying. So part of this transformative moment that we find ourselves in because of the radical impact of COVID-19 on our economy and our society is that many things can change for the better and for the worse. And it's up to Asian Americans not just to defend themselves at this moment, but to make a case for how it is that we stand up also.
Certainly this pandemic is a very new and different and unique in time, and what can be done differently so the cycle doesn't repeat?
Well, we are in a different place, even though we are seeing the cycle of history in a way repeat itself. And we are seeing the convergence of a time of these trends where this competition or naming China as the enemy of the US, but also the main difference that we can control here is the evolution of the Asian American people. When Vincent Chin was killed, the population of Asian Americans was very small. It was probably 1 or 2 million people. Now there are more than 20 million Asian Americans. And what we've found in the history of how Asian Americans have been used as a wedge, as a way to say, oh, you're the model minority today, because that means you're the better minority, or you're the enemy, in another case, to be bashed. None of those were creations by Asian Americans. None of those were ways that Asian Americans defined ourselves. Now we have 20 million more Asian Americans who have a voice. As soon as this bashing started, people were able to use social media and to say, first of all, alert, this is happening. But now we also have a way to talk about all the things that Darren and Viet were saying, that, for example, to point out that white supremacy moves forward when people are divided, and that we as Asian Americans will not let ourselves be used in a way to against other people of color, against any people at all, but that the way together is to come together and to support each other. We as Asian Americans have to begin to define ourselves, not let ourselves be used as the model minority on the one hand, or the ultimate diabolical enemy on the other. And we don't own them, we reject them. And so then it's up to us to define who we are in this country, in this world, and how we stand up for the rights of all people, because we reject the white supremacy house and white supremacy.
Being blamed for this pandemic and targets of discrimination, what should and can Asian Americans do?
Since the coronavirus originated in China, the Chinese American community has suffered backlash. It's an unfair association that a local group from the greater D.C. Chinese community is working to combat, and are doing so in a way that helps everyone. Our Holly Moore shows us how one group is going above and beyond to help in the fight against COVID-19.
Ironically, they are getting racially profiled because they are Chinese, and it's because of their connections to China that they're able to help out in a significant way. The group is called CASH, Chinese Americans Support Hospitals. Today, they made a major donation of medical supplies to several hospitals, including Suburban. And to say the doctors are grateful is an understatement.
As doctors, I want to just thank him and his group and Chinese Americans who are doing this all around the country.
Thank you, Cash, for this generous donation that's going to help us stay safe during this pandemic, that's going to help us continue taking care of our community, and you are part of that community, so thank you very much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Holy Cross Hospital was the first stop today, one of 12 hospitals where the self-organized grassroots group is donating medical supplies. And not just one carload. In total, their donation includes more than 112,000 medical surgical masks, 3,000 N95 face masks, more than 1,000 gowns, and 360 face shields, all of which they were able to get through suppliers in China. They are using their connections in that country to help the country they now call home.
We are one community. Either you are Chinese American,
Jewish American, Russian American, Indian American. We are, at this instance, we are one community, one family. This virus not only giving us headache, but also give us opportunity to know each other better.
The virus doesn't discriminate, and clearly the generosity of this group is all-encompassing too. Suburban, of course, was extremely grateful for the donation that was made here today. Of the 12 hospitals, 11 are in Maryland. The 12th hospital they're donating to is in D.C. It's the VA Medical Center. Back to you.
So many ways goes to the heart of what America is, of what New York is. The owners of a dry cleaners in Brooklyn, in this country for 30 years, but now shut down. Unbelievably hard on them financially, and yet they are contributing, making masks and then giving them away for free. Human kindness overflowing. Here's Lucy Yang.
This mom and pop dry cleaner shut down almost a month ago, but Lily and Tony have not stopped working. These busy bees have sewn and given away for free more than 2,000 masks to anyone.
It's done. Everybody asks me where I get my mask, and I say right here on Union Street.
What makes it an especially beautiful day here in Brooklyn is the selflessness. After 3 decades of running a successful small business, Lily and Tony tell me they are now down to 1 meal a day. Their son has lost 15 pounds, and they have no idea how they'll pay the rent.
We don't sell it, we just donate it.
That's one way of us to say thanks, America. We came here with bare hands. We raised our 3 kids big and go to college, and this is one way for us to say thanks.
This couple figured they had 2 choices: stay at home and despair, or come here to their store and give.
We try to do the best.
They call him Tony in the neighborhood. This is Brooklyn, after all. His son's lacrosse stick, now perfect for delivery.
This is the way.
That way we don't have to touch
we
it.
hang it for the customer.
And then they pick it up.
They pick it up.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's it.
They won't turn down a tip or extra fabric for more masks, but their goal now is simple: to protect their neighbors.
I think it's the most amazing thing to do at a time like this.
It's a love letter to the community.
We just want to try to help people.
We have seen some remarkable stories of people doing whatever they can to support doctors, nurses, and first responders, and some are helping even while being targets of hate. CBS 2's Christina Fan has this.
This could not have come at a more important time.
If frontline workers are fighting the battle against COVID-19, Chinese Americans have been helping supply the weapons needed to win this war. You can find the masks they've donated from hospitals to police precincts, from rescue squads to City Hall.
We have seen what can happen to a country that is affected by the virus from our friends and family.
Cassie Wong is a member of the American Chinese United Care Alliance. The group, comprised of nearly 150 Chinese organizations, has raised more than $5 million to buy PPE for medical staff. It was the American thing to do, they say, despite seeing a return of anti-Asian bigotry.
One of the comments was, good thing he's exercising and doing something good instead of going out there and eating things and creating more viruses. And that was just something that I was really taken aback by.
High schooler Richard Yan says he received the online message while shooting a YouTube fitness challenge to raise money. Chinese Americans are using their deep social networks to secure medical supplies from overseas. Zhang Yinchao says the community's ties with China enable them to secure these crucial donations. And no matter how much bias they may face, they will never stop their efforts.
Overwhelmingly, people of all stripes, of all parties, of all walks of life have come together in our state to do the right thing, and God bless you for doing it. First, I want to recognize New Jersey's strong and growing Chinese American community. United Chinese Americans has donated more than 10,000 N95 masks, 10,000 surgical masks, 80,000 medical gloves, 2,700 protective goggles, and 400 protective gowns for our frontline healthcare workers. And I want to give a special shout out to West Windsor Councilman Yin Chao, or YZ Chung, who was instrumental in organizing this equipment drive. Hats off to you, YZ.
This picture is a courtesy of DEP 4A member Adam Pagrigan. Adam's wife, Ruth, who's in the center of the picture, works at St. Joseph Regional Medical Center. A big shout out and grateful thanks to all Ruth's colleagues. This pandemic has caused sufferings in all of our communities, but from tragedy arises hope.
And I just want to say on behalf of New York City, which has seen its rise in Asian American hate crime, that you are not alone. And I want to say thank you to the number of frontline workers, grocery delivery workers, nurses, doctors of Asian descent that every day go to work to protect the rest of us and never worrying about the consequences to themselves or their own family. And to the cowards who think you can scapegoat the community, the answer is you can't, because we're going to be there every step of the way.
Now, many are calling for people to rise above the hate. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio.
We will not tolerate any discrimination. We will not tolerate any hate crimes.
Black, Hispanic, and Asian congressional leaders uniting to condemn racism.
It's important for us to negate the hate, come together as Americans.
And celebrities urging fans to stand up for each other. Actor Daniel Day Kim.
Please stop the prejudice and senseless violence against Asian people.
Social media campaigns wash the hate, racism is a virus, and I am not COVID-19 are spreading.
Namaste. Let's wash the hate.
Also spotlighting the growing discrimination, multiple op-eds, including mine. While there's more work ahead, some things have changed. After repeatedly calling it the Chinese virus, President Trump appears to have stopped and tweeted in part, "It is very important that we totally protect our Asian American community in the United States and all around the world. They are amazing people, and the spreading of the virus is not their fault." And in some of the racist attacks, people stepped in to help. Zach Owens risked his life to save the family attacked in Texas.
He saved our lives.
And for Dr. Fu, a stranger jumped in.
He defended me, and he said, "No, you can't do this." That guy was my hero.
And this is not just happening with adults. Just this week, an Asian mom posted this to her Instagram. A student in her daughter's second grade class said he didn't like China or Chinese people because they started this quarantine. She encouraged her daughter to put her feelings on paper, and the result was this letter. It reads in part, "This made me feel sad because he was my friend and I'm Chinese. It's wrong because he doesn't know what he's saying." But it ends on a compassionate note. "Thank you for being my friend." And it really is so important, Hoda, for parents to speak with their kids about this kind of discrimination.
I mean, it's so jarring, but to think of a second grader who's being mocked by another classmate is just so disturbing. And this whole thing makes me so sick. But if you are put in a position like some of these folks have been, what's the best thing for you to do?
Well, safety first. So you really do want to try to remove yourself from the situation. Of course, report the incident if you can. Both law enforcement and these advocacy groups say they take it very seriously. They will investigate and talk about it. Lean into your family and your friends for support. Sometimes you feel embarrassed or ashamed, like it's something you did to bring it on, but that's not the case. And you've got to put these messages out there. And it reminds us all, we're all in this together.
As an Asian American, I'm deeply worried for ourselves and our children. However, I am hopeful that we Americans will rise above prejudice and racism. Indeed, we're all in this together. Now I'd like to leave you with a piece that I turn to in time of uncertainty.
I pray you'll be our eyes and watch us where we go and help us to be wise in times when we don't know. Let this be our prayer. When we lose our way, lead us to a place.
Guide us with your grace. Give us faith so we'll be saved. Sogniamo un mondo senza più violenza.
soul to love. Let this be our prayer. Let this be our prayer. Just like every child. Just like every child. Need to find a place. Guide us with your grace. Sento che ci salverò.
Thank you for watching. Stay safe and well, and stay connected. Hope to see you soon.